Why was she even here tonight? That question echoed in her head as the hum of conversation and clinking of glasses filled the dim bar. The Iron Horse, a dusty, half-forgotten dive on the outskirts of Fort Benning, Georgia. A place where uniforms blurred with shadows, where laughter carried the sound of exhaustion, and where soldiers came to forget what the Army demanded of them. Staff Sergeant Maya Brooks sat alone at the far end of the bar. A glass of whiskey neat glowed amber under the hanging light, the ice catching hints of gold. She wore jeans, a dark t-shirt, and a leather jacket, civilian camouflage for someone who didn't belong in civilian life anymore. Her Ranger tab was locked away in a drawer back in her barracks, her service record classified, her memories impossible to talk about. No one here knew what she'd done overseas, how many times she'd walked out of a kill house, heart pounding, hands steady, face empty. And that was the point. She didn't want them to know. She didn't want to be the Ranger. Not tonight. 3 weeks of training recruits, kids who thought being loud and strong made them tough. 3 weeks of 18-hour days, endless drills, lectures, bruises, and paperwork. 3 weeks of holding herself together. She wanted one night of peace. But peace doesn't survive long in bars like this. "Hey, sweetheart," a voice slurred behind her, "you look lonely." She didn't turn around, didn't even sigh. "I'm good," she said quietly. Simple, firm, enough for most people. Not for him. "Come on," he said, closer now, his breath thick with vodka and entitlement. "Don't be like that. I'm just being friendly." "I appreciate it," she said, "but I'm not interested." He laughed, and she heard the sound of 3 more voices joining his. Friends. Drunk, loud. The kind of men who think the world owes them attention. "You think you're too good for me?" he asked, and this time his voice carried heat, the kind that turns nights ugly fast. Maya set the whiskey down and breathed slowly through her nose. She'd seen men like him on deployments, same arrogance, same need to dominate something smaller, weaker. Only difference was that this one wasn't holding an AK. She turned on her stool, calm, controlled. The man was tall, 6'2", maybe 220, gym muscles, artificial confidence. The kind who'd never been hit hard enough to question what pain really felt like. "Look," she said evenly, "I'm asking you nicely. Please, leave me alone." He smirked. "Or what?" Maya's eyes didn't blink, cold, still, the kind of stare that said, "You have no idea who you're talking to." "You really don't want to find out," she said. But he wanted to find out. His hand shot forward, reaching for her arm, a territorial grab, clumsy and confident. The bar went quieter, not silent, just cautious. People sensed the air change like before a storm. Her reflexes kicked in before thought did. She caught his wrist mid-reach, stepped inside his space, and drove her elbow into his solar plexus. One clean, surgical strike. The air left his lungs with a grunt that sounded like a confession. He folded over, gasping, confusion painted across his face. The bartender, old, steady, watched from behind the counter. He'd seen fights before. He hadn't seen this. "Hey," one of the friends barked. Big guy, shaved head, tattoos up both arms. He stepped forward, angry and stupid, swinging wide. The punch came fast but telegraphed, the kind you could read from a mile away. Maya slipped it easily, moving just enough that his fist caught air. Then she countered, a palm strike to the jaw, sharp, controlled. Not enough to knock him out, just enough to reset his ego. He stumbled backward. 2 more moved in from the sides. They thought numbers would make them dangerous. They were wrong. Maya moved like water, controlled chaos, efficiency in motion. Left attacker swung first. She ducked low, shoulder driving into his ribs, momentum flipping him over a table. Glass shattered, beer spilled, chairs scattered. The bar turned into a ripple of panic, soldiers moving back, civilians ducking. The last man came at her like a linebacker, 280 easy, full charge. She waited, calculated. Then at the last instant, she sidestepped, knee rising like a piston, impacting the nerve cluster in his thigh. He dropped, his leg dead, crashing face first into the bar. The crack of wood was loud enough to stop every conversation in the room. The first man, the one who started it all, had finally caught his breath. And now he was angry, angry and humiliated. He pulled something from his pocket, metal, 4 inches of cheap folding steel. A knife. The bartender's hand froze mid-wipe. Conversations died completely. Maya didn't flinch. "Put the knife down," she said softly. "Last chance." He sneered, "Screw you." He lunged. She caught his wrist again, same motion, tighter this time, and twisted. A pop echoed in the bar, sharp and cruel. His elbow bent the wrong way. The knife clattered to the floor. He screamed, cradling his arm. She didn't move, didn't gloat. She simply stood there, calm, breathing evenly like she was back in training. Only this time the target screamed and bled. The other 3 stared, confusion, pain, rage. They were used to women shrinking when men got loud. They just learned what happens when one doesn't. Maya reached over the bar, picked up the knife by the dull edge, and tossed it behind the counter. "Walk away," she said. "We're done here." "We're not done until I say we're done," the big guy spat, blood dripping from his nose. He pulled out his phone, swiping furiously. "I'm calling the cops. You assaulted us." Maya almost laughed. "You attacked me. There are witnesses, 20 of them." "Doesn't matter," he said. "You're going to jail." Before she could reply, the bartender leaned forward, his voice calm, like someone explaining gravity. "Son," he said, "you might want to reconsider that call." The big man frowned. "Why?" "Because you just picked a fight with an Army Ranger and you lost. Badly. If the cops show up, you're the ones going to jail for assault." The color drained from the man's face. He looked at Maya, really looked this time. Saw not a woman, not a civilian, but something trained, dangerous, controlled. You're military." She didn't answer, she didn't have to. Her stillness was answer enough. He swallowed. "Staff Sergeant, 75th Ranger Regiment, and you just committed self-defense," she said coolly. "Now walk away before I stop being generous." Silence. The 4 men shared a look, the look of men finally calculating consequences. They left. The door swung shut behind them, and for a long second the bar just sat in stunned quiet. Then slowly, someone started clapping. It spread, soft at first, then louder. Soldiers, locals, everyone who'd watched a woman dismantle 4 men with calm precision. The bartender smiled as he poured another whiskey. "That was impressive, Sergeant," he said. "Where'd you learn to fight like that?" "Ranger school," she said, taking the glass, "and 12 years of practice." "Well," he said, "drinks are on the house tonight." She raised her glass, gave him a nod. "Appreciate it." The applause faded, the music returned, but the air hadn't settled. Because outside the Iron Horse, the night was only beginning. The street was quiet when Maya stepped into it, cool Georgia air, the hum of a distant generator, the echo of her own boots on the sidewalk. The kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath. 3 blocks from base, almost home. That's when she heard it. The low rumble of an engine, slow, too slow. A van rolled up beside her, no headlights, windows tinted. She didn't need to look to know who was inside. The side door slid open. "Get in the van," a voice said, the same one from the bar. He wasn't slurring now, he was clear, cold, sober. And this time he wasn't alone. 2 guns gleamed under the streetlight. "You humiliated us," he said. "Made us look like fools, now you're gonna pay." Maya scanned, eyes moving the way they had overseas. Corners, distances, cover. 2 outside, 2 inside, Glock 19, revolver, unknown backup. No civilians in sight, No MPs, bad odds. Her service weapon was back in her quarters. She should have been scared. She was. No, she said simply. What? I said no. I'm not getting in your van, you're going to drive away. If you're smart, you'll forget I exist. He laughed. You think you're tough. We've got guns, sweetheart. Then pull the trigger, she said quietly. Because if you don't kill me, I'll find you. And when I do, you'll wish you pulled it faster. Her voice was level, no threat, just fact. The kind of tone that comes from someone who's seen the worst and survived it. The men hesitated. Because even drunk courage breaks under certainty. Last chance, she said, drive away. The driver made a decision, grab her. Two jumped out. Maya didn't run. She attacked. They moved fast, too fast for their level of drunken rage. But Maya was faster. The first man reached for her arm. She stepped in, trapping his wrist against her body, driving her knee straight into his groin with controlled precision. The sound he made wasn't human, half gasp, half collapse. She used his falling weight like a tool, pivoting, dragging him in front of her as the second attacker lunged. The two men collided hard, stumbling. For a heartbeat it was chaos. Legs tangled, curses shouted, gun hands unsure. And Maya, calm in the eye of the storm. Shoot her, someone yelled from the van. But they couldn't fire, not without hitting their own men. That was her opening. She moved, low, quick, disciplined. Years of CQB training compressed into instinct. She darted around the van's rear corner, using the steel as cover, keeping her line of sight clean. Her breath was steady, eyes tracking shadows. Never stop moving, never give them a target. The one with the revolver, she saw him through the van's side mirror, was circling around. His boots scraped on gravel. He thought he had the angle. Stop moving, he said, voice trembling under false courage, or I'll shoot. She turned to face him slowly, hands raised, body still. Okay, she said softly, you win. He smiled, nervous victory flickering across his face. He stepped closer. 8 feet. 6. 4. And that's when she moved. A blur of precision and aggression. She closed the gap in less than a second, inside the reaction zone, redirected the revolver's muzzle just as he pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the night, echoing into nothing. The round went wide, harmless. Her other hand slammed into his wrist, twisting the weapon free. The gun was hers now. She pointed it at him, steady, unwavering. On the ground, she said, voice level. All of you face down, hands behind your heads. They froze. The sound of power shifting was almost visible, the way fear filled the space between her words. You're crazy, the big one said. I'm trained, she replied. There's a difference. Her tone was flat. It wasn't anger or even confidence. It was certainty, the kind that soldiers earn only after walking through enough fire to stop fearing the heat. One by one, the men complied, faces in the dirt, fingers laced behind their heads. Maya kept the revolver trained on them, her grip textbook. She didn't shake, didn't breathe fast. She'd been in firefights where hesitation meant body bags. This wasn't one of them. With her free hand, she reached into her jacket, pulled out her phone and hit speed dial. Her voice stayed calm, clipped, professional. MP desk. This is Staff Sergeant Maya Brooks, ID number Tango 75902. I've got 4 civilians at gunpoint outside, building 7215. Attempted armed kidnapping of a federal service member. Send units immediately. She didn't hang up until they confirmed dispatch. Then finally, she allowed herself to breathe. The night air smelled of oil and asphalt. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears, not from fear, but from focus. Every muscle in her body buzzed with controlled tension. 3 minutes later, the street filled with blue and red lights. The military police arrived fast, weapons drawn, movements efficient. Within seconds, the four men were disarmed, cuffed, and face down on the asphalt. The lead MP, Sergeant stripes faded from years of sun, approached Maya carefully. "Sergeant Brooks," he said, recognizing her name before she even spoke. "You okay?" She nodded once. "Fine, Sergeant." "These idiots pulled guns on you?" he asked. "They did," she said, tone steady, "and I disarmed one." The sergeant exhaled, disbelief half-smile crossing his face. What were they thinking? "They weren't," Maya said. "That's the problem." He shook his head, muttering something about paperwork. As the MPs read the Miranda rights, she handed over the revolver, careful to keep the barrel pointed away. "Evidence," she said. They logged it, tagged it, and took her statement on the spot. By the time she returned to her barracks, it was past midnight. The room was quiet. That kind of military quiet that still hums with the faint whir of AC vents and the far-off sound of distant boots in a hallway. She sat on the edge of her bunk, still wearing her jacket, hands clasped loosely in her lap. Adrenaline fades slowly. But when it fades, something heavier replaces it: reflection. She looked down at her hands, flexed her fingers. No tremor, no guilt. Just calm. Somewhere inside, though, a question lingered. Why does it always have to end this way? It wasn't pride that burned in her chest, it was something else. Something like sorrow. Every time she defended herself, every time she used what the army had taught her, she felt that old ache return, the one that reminded her she could never really turn it off. She joined to serve, to protect, not to fight drunk men outside a bar. But the truth was, she'd been fighting versions of them her entire life. Morning came too soon. By 700, she was in uniform, crisp and squared away, summoned to Colonel Marcus Hendricks' office. She expected a debrief, standard procedure after a civilian incident involving military personnel. But she didn't expect to find someone else in the room. A man in a dark gray suit sat across from the colonel's desk, briefcase open, paperwork neatly stacked. He didn't look like law enforcement, he looked like trouble. "Staff Sergeant Brooks," Colonel Hendricks said, gesturing toward the seat. "At ease, Sergeant. This is Mr. Richard Mallory. He's an attorney representing the four men arrested last night." Maya's jaw tightened slightly. "Sir." "Have a seat," the colonel said. She sat, posture straight. Mallory smiled like lawyers do when they think they're already winning. "Sergeant Brooks," he began smoothly, "my clients allege that you used excessive force. First at the Iron Horse bar, then later when you detained them." Maya didn't blink. "Is there a question in there, sir? Do you dispute these allegations?" "Yes," she said simply, "completely." He shuffled papers. "You broke one man's arm, dislocated another's shoulder." "They initiated contact," she said evenly. "One grabbed my arm, 3 others attacked when I defended myself. I used proportional force." "Proportional?" he asked, feigning disbelief. "You're a trained soldier, they were unarmed civilians." "One pulled a knife," she said. "That made him armed." The room went silent. Mallory frowned. "And later you held my clients at gunpoint." "After they attempted to force me into a van at gunpoint," she said. "Yes." "You could have retreated." "I was unarmed, 4 attackers, no witnesses. I did what was necessary to survive." Colonel Hendricks leaned forward, voice measured. "Mr. Mallory, we have security footage from the bar, witness statements from over 20 individuals. Everything corroborates Sergeant Brooks' account." The lawyer tried to recover. "My clients are civilians, Colonel. This is an imbalance of force." "Your clients pulled weapons on a federal service member, twice," Hendricks replied. "They're lucky she showed restraint." Mallory's tone shifted. "We're prepared to offer a settlement, drop all charges, a non-disclosure agreement, compensation for the sergeant's distress." "No," Maya said. Mallory blinked. "Excuse me." I said no, she repeated. Your clients attacked me twice. They terrified civilians, they pulled guns. I don't want your money, I want justice. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Hendrik stood, his voice steel under calm. This meeting is over, Mr. Mallory. Sergeant Brooks dismissed. She saluted, turned, and walked out without another word. In the hallway, the buzz of fluorescent lights and the low murmur of distant offices filled the silence. A younger officer, Lieutenant Sarah Palmer, caught up to her. Sergeant Brooks, she said breathlessly, is it true, about the Iron Horse? Maya sighed, depends on what you heard. That you took down 4 guys, that one had a gun, that MPs found them at your feet. Maya gave a faint shrug. I defended myself, that's all. Palmer shook her head, a grin tugging at the edge of her mouth. You did more than that, you proved something. Maya frowned. I wasn't trying to prove anything. Maybe not, but you did anyway, Palmer said. You showed everyone, especially the women here, that we belong, that we can handle ourselves. She hesitated, lowering her voice. Word spreads fast around base. You're kind of a legend now. Maya stopped walking. Legends are for people who want attention, she said. I just want to do my job. Palmer smiled. That's exactly why they're talking about you. That night, alone again in her barracks, Maya sat by the window, looking out toward the training fields. The wind carried the faint echo of gunfire from the range, short, controlled bursts. Somewhere out there, recruits were learning to fight. She'd spent her life teaching them how. But tonight, for the first time, she wondered what lesson she'd actually taught. That violence could be justified. That control was everything. That no matter how far you run from conflict, it always finds you. She didn't have the answer. All she knew was that the world wasn't fair, but training made it survivable. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and let the thought drift across her mind like smoke. You can teach discipline, you can teach strength. But you can't teach peace when the world keeps testing your silence. The Iron Horse was quiet that night. But the story of what happened there had already begun to spread. And by morning, every soldier on base would know the name Maya Brooks. How do you punish someone for surviving? That's the thought that haunted Maya in the days after the incident. On paper, she'd done everything right, followed training, acted within protocol, used minimum necessary force. But in reality, survival never looks clean, not to people who have never had to fight for it. The investigation moved fast, too fast. Statements were taken, footage reviewed. The story hit whispers on base before the paperwork was even dry. Every soldier with a phone had seen the Iron Horse video by sunrise, a grainy clip of a woman flattening 4 men in under 30 seconds. No sound, just motion, efficiency, precision, calm destruction. By noon, she wasn't just Staff Sergeant Brooks. She was the female ranger who destroyed 4 guys at a bar. And that was the problem. Because attention, even the good kind, is dangerous in her line of work. The trial began 2 months later. No courtroom theatrics, no dramatic confessions, just evidence, cold and clinical. The prosecutor played security footage, 4 drunk men harassing a woman, escalating into violence. Witnesses testified. Cell phone videos backed every frame. Bodycam footage from the MPs sealed the deal. It wasn't even close. The defense tried to argue imbalance of force, military discipline versus civilian ignorance. But when the prosecutor played the recording of the men's threats, "Get in the van," the jury's faces changed. The air in the room shifted from curiosity to disgust. Guilty. All 4 counts. Assault, attempted kidnapping, possession of firearms during a felony. 10 years. No parole for 7. The gavel came down like a door closing. But Maya wasn't there to hear it. She was back at Fort Benning, running obstacle courses in the Georgia heat, yelling cadence over the sound of boots on mud. Doing her job. Like always. That night, she sat alone on the training field bleachers. The air smelled like sweat and dust and gunpowder. She watched recruits run the course under floodlights, stumbling, swearing, getting back up. They didn't know she'd just won a case that would define her career. And she didn't care. Because the truth was, she hadn't felt like she'd won anything. She survived again, that was all. And survival in her world came with no applause. The next morning she was summoned again, this time, to Colonel Hendrick's office. Only this time there was no lawyer. Just the colonel, and a quiet kind of pride he tried to hide behind professionalism. "Sergeant Brooks," he said, "the U.S. Attorney's Office wanted me to inform you personally. The men pled guilty." She stood at attention. "Understood, sir." He looked at her for a long moment. "You handled yourself well, Sergeant, on the street, in the aftermath. You made this regiment proud." "Thank you, sir." "You'll have reporters reach out," he warned. "Ignore them. We'll handle the PR. You don't need to speak to anyone." "Yes, sir." "And Sergeant." "Yes, sir." He leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. "You changed something here, whether you wanted to or not." She didn't reply, because she didn't know if that was good or bad. By evening, the whispers had grown into legend. At the mess hall, soldiers talked in lowered voices, retelling the story like folklore. 4 guys jumped her. She broke one's arm with her bare hands. She disarmed a gun. She made them all surrender. Every retelling exaggerated something. And with each version, Maya Brooks became something bigger than herself, less woman, more myth. But myths come with distance. And distance is a lonely thing. During a night navigation course, a young specialist spoke up. "Sergeant Brooks," he asked nervously, "is it true what they say about the Iron Horse?" The rest of the trainees turned to listen. She could feel their curiosity burning through discipline. She stopped walking. The flashlight beams wavered in the dark woods. "What do they say, specialist?" "That 4 guys attacked you, and you hospitalized all of them. That one had a gun and you took it from him." She let the silence stretch. Her breath formed clouds in the cold air. "Hear what happened," she said finally. 4 men attacked me because they didn't like being told no. They thought size and numbers meant power. They were wrong. I used my training to defend myself. They went to prison. That's the end of it." The recruits exchanged looks, unsatisfied. One asked quietly, "How'd you stay calm, Sergeant? They had guns." Maya looked at him, young, unscarred, still learning what fear really meant. "I stayed calm," she said softly, "because panic gets you killed. In combat, in life, you can't stop fear, but you can train past it. Discipline beats chaos, every time." Another voice, hesitant. "What if they'd actually shot you?" She paused, then answered with the same quiet truth she'd always known. "Then I'd be dead," she said, "and they'd be facing murder charges, but they didn't shoot because they were never ready for real violence. They were bullies. Bullies fold when you stand up to them." Her tone wasn't prideful, it was tired. Like someone who'd seen that truth too many times. "The lesson," she said, "isn't that you should fight. It's that you don't back down when someone tries to take something from you, your space, your safety, your dignity. Because if you do, they'll take more." The group fell silent. Somewhere in the trees, an owl called. Boots crunched against gravel as the lesson continued, quieter now, slower. The kind of silence that means something, sinking in. Weeks passed. The Iron Horse reopened under new management, new lighting, new rules. A small brass plaque appeared on the wall near the bar. "In honor of Staff Sergeant Maya Brooks, 75th Ranger Regiment, who proved Rangers don't start fights, but we finish them." Maya saw it on her next visit. She didn't smile, didn't frown either, just stared at it for a long moment. The same bartender from that night poured her whiskey. "You're famous now, Sergeant," he said, sliding the glass toward her. "I'm really not." He grinned. "Around here you are, you made this place safe. Before you we had fights every weekend. Drunk idiots, broken glass, police reports. Now." He gestured to the quiet crowd, soldiers laughing, civilians talking, no tension in the air. "Now nobody starts trouble. They know better. They know a ranger might be in the room." Maya exhaled softly. "That wasn't my goal." "Maybe not," the bartender said, polishing a glass. "But it worked. You proved something, that discipline wins, that gender doesn't decide strength, and that underestimating someone because of it." He nodded toward the plaque. "Is a fatal mistake." She looked down at the amber light shimmering in her glass. The whiskey tasted different now. Not comfort, not burn. "Just wait." "Got a daughter in basic," the bartender said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "Jessica wants to go ranger." He hesitated. "I was scared, thought it was too dangerous, too hard. Then I saw what you did, how you handled yourself. And I realized she's gonna be fine, because rangers like you are showing her the way." Maya's eyes softened just slightly. "Jessica Palmer." "Yeah, that's her." She smiled faintly. "Tell her to find me when she makes it through selection. I'll make sure she gets good instruction." He grinned. "You'll do that." "I owe her that much. She's walking a path that's harder than most realize." He raised his glass. "To rangers, the ones who don't back down." She lifted hers in return. "To rangers." The clink of glass sounded louder than it should have. As the night wore on, the bar filled with new faces, recruits, locals, old vets sharing space under a kind of unspoken truce. No fights, no shouts, just calm. A young private approached her nervously, hat in hand. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Staff Sergeant Brooks?" "I am." "I'm Private First Class Chen," the girl said quickly. "Just finished AIT, trying for Ranger next year. I wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For showing me it's possible." Maya tilted her head slightly. "Possible. That women can do this," Chen said. "That we can belong. That we don't have to take crap from anyone." Maya saw it then, the same light she used to carry, the one that hadn't dimmed yet. And for the first time in months, she smiled. "Private Chen," she said softly, "Ranger School will break you. You'll be cold, wet, hungry, and doubted every day. But if you've got the heart and the discipline, you'll make it. Gender doesn't matter. Heart does." Chen straightened, nodding hard. "Yes, Sergeant, thank you, Sergeant." As the young soldier walked away, Maya looked down at her drink and whispered to herself. "Heart does." The bartender caught the look in her eyes. "You inspired her, you know." Maya shook her head. "I just did my job." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but sometimes doing your job changes the world for someone else." She didn't argue. Outside, the neon glow from the Iron Horse flickered against the night sky, reflecting in the window like an echo of everything she'd become. Not a hero, not a myth, just a soldier who refused to stay quiet when pushed. A legend born not from glory, but from restraint. And somewhere deep down, she hoped the world remembered that difference. They said the army never forgets. But it wasn't the army that remembered her. It was everyone else. Months had passed since that night outside the Iron Horse. Maya thought the story would fade like the echo of gunfire after a training exercise, loud, then gone. But legends don't fade, they grow roots. And hers had taken hold. It started small, a passing mention in a training memo. Then a clip played in a tactical analysis briefing. Soon, instructors across Fort Benning were dissecting her movements like they were doctrine. "Look at her timing. Note the joint manipulation, perfect pressure control. No overuse of force, just efficiency. They called it case review. But what it really was mythology under a microscope. By summer, she was summoned again to headquarters, this time, not for reprimand or praise, but something stranger. When she walked into the briefing room, she didn't expect what she saw. Rows of chairs, officers, senior NCOs, a projector humming softly in the corner. The screen displayed a freeze-frame image, her, caught mid-movement in the Iron Horse footage, left hand deflecting, right elbow striking, face calm. It looked like a training manual photo, only this one was real. Colonel Hendricks stood at the front. "This," he said, gesturing toward the screen, "is the reason we're revising our close-quarters combat doctrine. What you see here is the definition of proportional force under pressure. Sergeant Brooks demonstrated what we expect Rangers to embody: precision, restraint, and control." He looked toward her. "Maya, you didn't just win a fight. You showed the difference between training and panic." The screen shifted. Text appeared. Brooks Protocol, applied defensive doctrine for real-world engagements. She blinked. "Sir, Brooks Protocol." The colonel smiled faintly. "It's what the instructors started calling it. We decided to make it official." She didn't know what to say. There it was, her name stamped onto a doctrine. Something permanent. Something she hadn't agreed to. The presentation continued. Video slowed to half speed as an instructor narrated the details. "Notice the situational awareness," he said. "Sergeant Brooks never escalates. She controls the environment, uses the bar as tactical space, avoids lethal strikes, prioritizes defense." The freeze frame zoomed in on her posture, perfect balance, core tight, eyes locked. She shows what happens when training overrides emotion. Another clip, the confrontation outside the bar. Voiceover explaining timing, positioning, reaction gap. She closes distance inside the reaction window, the only viable counter to a drawn weapon. Textbook CQB. To Maya, it didn't look textbook. It looked like a woman exhausted, trying not to die. She didn't see technique. She saw fear, controlled, buried, weaponized. And now it was PowerPoint material. After the session, instructors approached her in a line. Handshakes, compliments, questions. "How'd you keep your breathing steady? What went through your mind when the gun went off? Would you change anything if it happened again?" Maya's answers were short, precise. "I stayed calm because training demands it. I thought about angles, not fear. I wouldn't change a thing." But when one young lieutenant asked, "What were you feeling?" she hesitated. Because that question wasn't tactical. It was human. She looked him in the eye. "I wasn't trying to win," she said quietly. "I was trying to survive. That's what we should teach. Not how to fight, how to live when fighting finds you." The lieutenant nodded, writing her words down as if they were doctrine too. That night she couldn't sleep. Her name was everywhere now, on memos, in training updates, on slides. The Brooks Protocol. A title she never asked for. She sat at her desk under the yellow light, uniform shirt unbuttoned at the collar, staring at the piece of paper she'd been asked to sign, authorization for the program's expansion. She traced the header with her finger. BROOKS Protocol, COMBATIVES Application, Restricted Distribution. Her name, her legacy. Stamped into policy. She should have felt proud. She didn't. It felt like reading her own obituary. Because the Army doesn't name things after the living, unless they expect the name to outlast them. The next morning, she ran her class as usual. Physical drills, close quarters defense, pressure testing. Her students were sharper now, hungrier. They watched her differently, like every movement meant something sacred. During break, a private spoke up. "Sergeant, are you the Brooks from the protocol?" She wiped sweat from her face, unfortunately. The class laughed, but she didn't. Why, unfortunately, Sergeant? Another asked. She looked at them, 20 young soldiers, tired but eager, staring at her like she was a symbol of what they wanted to become. Because that protocol only exists because 4 men tried to kill me, she said, and I had to hurt them to make it home. That's not glory, that's survival. Silence filled the training room. Even the air conditioning seemed to quiet. She took a breath. But if what I learned that night helps one of you walk away alive someday, then it was worth it. That evening, the Ranger Training Brigade held a formal briefing. Senior staff from other bases attended via video. The screen showed faces from Fort Bragg, Fort Liberty, Fort Carson, the Army-wide rollout. Colonel Hendricks addressed them all. The Brooks Protocol, he said, is not about aggression. It's about discipline. It's about control under duress. Sergeant Brooks didn't panic when outnumbered. She didn't escalate when she could have. She used the exact amount of force required and no more. He looked directly into the camera. That is what separates professionals from brawlers. That's what separates soldiers from civilians. When the feed ended, the room erupted in applause. Maya didn't join in. She just watched the screen fade to black, her own reflection faint in it. The colonel approached quietly. "Sergeant," he said, "this doctrine will save lives. You did that." She nodded, "Yes, sir." "You should be proud." "I'm trying to be, sir," she said softly. He studied her a moment. "You don't like being the symbol, do you?" She exhaled. "Symbols don't get to be human, sir." He smiled faintly. "No, but they inspire humans to be better." Weeks later, she returned to the Iron Horse for the first time since the protocol's release. The bar hadn't changed much. Same cracked leather booths, same faint scent of old beer and dust, same hum of country rock on the jukebox. But the people had. No one stared. No whispers. Just quiet respect, that subtle shift in energy when everyone knows who you are but decides not to say it. The bartender smiled when he saw her. "Heard they named an Army program after you." "Unfortunately," she said again, sitting down. He laughed. "You keep saying that like it's a curse." "It's just strange," she said. "I wanted to forget that night. Now it's being taught to every recruit who joins the force." He poured her whiskey. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe forgetting, not what we're supposed to do." She looked up. "You think so?" He shrugged. "You didn't start that fight, but the way you finished it changed things. That's worth remembering." A few tables away, a pair of soldiers off duty mid-conversation were discussing combatives training. "Man, the Brooks drills are brutal," one said. "My wrist still hurts from the reversal set." His buddy chuckled. "Yeah, but it works. You hear what the instructors say. That Ranger Brooks pulled it off for real. Legend." Maya heard them. Didn't turn around. Didn't interrupt. Just sipped her whiskey. She learned something over the years. Legends weren't built from victories. They were built from restraint. It wasn't the violence people remembered. It was the control. Later that night, she stood outside the Iron Horse, the neon sign buzzing faintly above her head. The Georgia night was still, the same street where a van once rolled up, quiet now. She looked down the road, remembering how close it had come. How easy it would have been for things to end differently. She whispered to herself, "I didn't win that night, I just didn't lose." And in her world, that was enough. Weeks turned into months. The Brooks Protocol spread across bases, new instructors, new lesson plans, even a training manual bearing her name. Her story was now part of the Army's DNA. And with it came recruits, more women than ever before, signing up for Ranger selection. Each one walking a path a little less lonely because someone before them refused to back down. When Captain Sarah Palmer stopped by her training range one morning, she carried a stack of new applications. "Female enlistments for Ranger School are up 40%, she said proudly. "They're calling it the Brooks effect." Maya almost smiled. Please tell them to stop nomming things after me. Palmer grinned. Too late, you started a movement. Maya shook her head. I didn't start anything, I just defended myself. Maybe, Palmer said, but you did it the right way, calm, controlled, no hate. That's why it stuck. They stood in silence, watching recruits push through mud and wire, shouting cadence under the sun. Palmer spoke softly, almost to herself. You know, Sergeant, you proved something, that we belong here, all of us. Maya's reply was quiet. I didn't prove we belong. I reminded everyone we already did. That night back in her quarters, she sat again at her desk. A folder lay open before her, Brooks Protocol Revision 2. At the bottom of the draft, someone had written a note in pen. For the ranger who turned survival into doctrine. She stared at the line for a long time. Then in neat, deliberate letters she wrote beneath it. For every ranger who refuses to back down. And she signed it not as a legend, not as a name, but as a soldier still learning how to live with what she'd survived. Fame doesn't echo in the halls of Fort Benning. It lingers quietly like the smell of gun oil and dust. For most soldiers, that's all it ever becomes. A rumor, a story told between training cycles. But for Staff Sergeant Maya Brooks, it became something else. Something she could never quite escape. 6 months after the Brooks Protocol was implemented, Fort Benning looked different. The training fields were busier. The classrooms louder. And for the first time in Army history, there were enough women in the Ranger pipeline to fill an entire course roster. They called themselves Brooks Class 1. Maya didn't like the name. But she didn't argue either. Because deep down, she understood what it meant, not just for them, but for every woman who'd ever been told she didn't belong in combat boots. Still, it was strange being the face of something she never volunteered for. She walked the range one morning, clipboard in hand, while trainees moved through drills. Sunlight hit the Georgia dust, turning everything gold. The cadence chants carried through the air like heartbeat echoes. Her assistant instructor jogged up beside her, Staff Sergeant Morales, one of the newer cadre. Brooks' class is crushing it, he said. Highest endurance scores we've seen. The female candidates are holding pace with the men. Some of them are beating them. Maya kept her eyes on the line. They're Rangers, she said. We don't separate capability by gender here. Still, Morales said, grinning, word is they're inspired by you. She stopped walking. That's dangerous. He blinked. How's that dangerous? Because inspiration fades, she said. Discipline doesn't. If they're chasing me, they'll burn out. But if they chase the standard, they'll survive. Morales nodded slowly, spoken like a real ranger. She glanced at him, half-smile ghosting across her face. I've been accused of that. Later that day, she sat alone in the mess hall, tray untouched. A few soldiers passed her table, whispering softly. She caught fragments of her own name. That's her, the ranger from the Iron Horse. I heard she took down 4 guys with one hand. Now it was 6, and one had a machete. Maya didn't correct them. She never did. Because the truth wasn't cinematic, it was ugly. It was sweat and noise and fear and survival. She learned that legends weren't made of victories. They were made of stories people needed to believe. And sometimes, those stories stopped feeling like yours. That night, Maya returned to her quarters and opened a small box from her locker. Inside were things she never displayed. A photo from her first deployment. A Ranger tab frayed at the edges. And a letter folded so many times it looked soft. It was from her brother, sent years ago from a hospital bed after his accident. She read the line she always came back to. You don't need to prove you're strong, Maya. You just need to come home. She closed the box, eyes steady. Home wasn't a place for her anymore. Home was the job. The following week, she received an invitation. A ceremony. Pentagon recognition. The Brooks Protocol had been officially adopted across all U.S. Army training facilities. They wanted her to attend the announcement. The letter called her a model of discipline and courage. It used words like trailblazer, pioneer, modern ranger ethos. She stared at it for a long time, then folded it neatly and set it aside. She didn't go, because somewhere deep down she knew. Ceremonies honor what's already over. And she wasn't done yet. Days passed quietly after that. Until one morning, a visitor appeared on the range, Private First Class Chen. The same young woman from the Iron Horse months ago, now in full ranger training uniform, mud streaked across her face. Maya saw her and almost smiled. Almost. Private Chen, she said, didn't think you'd make it this far. Chen stood at attention, chest heaving from the run. Yes, Sergeant, you told me to find you when I did. I did, Maya said, nodding. How's it going? Harder than I thought, Chen admitted, but I'm still here. Good, Maya said. That's all Ranger School is, not quitting. Chen hesitated. Sergeant, when it gets bad, when I'm cold and hungry, I think about you, about that night at the bar, how you stood your ground, it keeps me going. Maya looked at her, the mud, the exhaustion, the spark of belief still burning bright. You shouldn't think about me, she said quietly. You should think about who you'll be when it's over. Chen frowned slightly. Yes, Sergeant. Good, Maya said softly. Because when it's done and the tab's on your shoulder, you won't be following anyone else's shadow. You'll be walking your own. That night Maya sat on the bleachers again, same spot as before. Same wind, same distant sound of rifles echoing across the range. Only this time she wasn't alone. Captain Sarah Palmer climbed up beside her, coffee in hand. You ever gonna accept that you changed everything? Palmer asked, smiling faintly. Maya chuckled, still trying to figure out if that's a compliment or a warning. Bit of both, Palmer said. You know what they're saying at command. They're reviewing every combative's curriculum, reworking them around your protocols. I heard, Maya said, eyes still on the horizon. Palmer sipped her coffee. You realize what that means, right? You didn't just survive, you redefined survival. Maybe, Maya said, but it doesn't change who I am. Palmer smiled. Maybe it does, maybe that's okay. 2 months later, Maya was temporarily reassigned, a short-term deployment to assist with training integration at Fort Bragg. New faces, new tempo. Same discipline. But there was something different about this post. The trainees there were younger, cockier. Some had already watched the videos, studied her techniques. To them, she wasn't just an instructor. She was the ranger from the story. And that made her job harder. Respect is earned. But myth skips the process. And myth kills humility. During one drill, a trainee male, early 20s, too confident, smirked through her instructions. Sergeant Brooks, he said, trying to sound casual. We all saw the footage. If it was me, I wouldn't have let those guys get that close. She looked at him for a long second, unblinking. What's your name, Private? Reeves, ma'am. Reeves, she said. You think being tough means hitting first. He shrugged, sometimes. She nodded slowly. All right, Reeves, step onto the mat. The class went silent. He grinned, still thinking it was a challenge he could win. She didn't hit him, didn't hurt him. She let him swing once, twice, sloppy, overconfident strikes. She moved only when he overextended, redirecting his momentum. In less than 3 seconds, he was on the ground, arm pinned, breath gone. She released him, stood up, and said quietly, strength without control is just noise. Learn the difference or someone else will teach it to you the hard way. The class stood straighter after that. Reeves never smirked again. That evening she walked back to her quarters, tired but calm. A letter sat on her cot, official stationery, base stamp. She opened it carefully. It was from Jessica Palmer, the bartender's daughter. Sergeant Brooks, I passed Ranger selection. I'm in. My dad said you believed in me before I believed in myself. I hope I make you proud. Jessica. Maya read it twice, then 3 times. Something soft broke open in her chest, not pride exactly, something gentler, something like peace. For the first time in a long time, she smiled without hesitation. Weeks later, at a graduation ceremony, Jessica stood among the newest Rangers, exhausted, uniform crisp, eyes fierce. Maya watched from the back. When their eyes met, Jessica gave a small, almost secret nod. Maya returned it. No words. No salute. Just mutual understanding. Sometimes that was enough. Later that night, the base was quiet again. Maya walked alone through the motor pool, the hum of the floodlights breaking the silence. She paused, looking up at the night sky, stars scattered across a field of darkness. Her reflection appeared faintly in the window of a Humvee. She barely recognized herself. Older, harder, quieter. But beneath the fatigue, something else had settled, a calm she hadn't felt in years. For once, she wasn't thinking about the Iron Horse, or the 4 men, or the legend that followed her. She was thinking about every soldier who came after her, every recruit who'd ever doubted their place, every woman who'd been told she couldn't. Maybe that was enough legacy for one lifetime. She closed her eyes, whispered into the night. If I did one thing right, it was not backing down. The wind moved across the lot, carrying faint laughter from the barracks, new Rangers celebrating, voices young, alive, unbroken. She listened for a moment, then turned toward her quarters, boots crunching softly in the gravel. And as she walked, she thought about how far she'd come from that bar. From that night. From that single, simple decision not to be silent. Because sometimes, history doesn't start with wars. It starts with one woman saying no. And meaning it. They called her a hero. But heroes don't eat dinner alone. The world outside the gates of Fort Benning had finally caught up with her name. Articles, podcasts, interviews she never gave. The female ranger who redefined self-defense. How one woman changed Army training forever. They even used her photo, taken without her knowing, from a distance during a graduation ceremony. In it she looked composed, controlled. The caption called her a symbol of courage. But symbols, she thought, don't sleep much. They just stand there, shining quietly while the world projects whatever it wants onto them. It had been over a year since the Iron Horse incident. A year since 4 men taught her, and the Army, a lesson about violence and restraint. Now every training base across the country used the Brooks Protocol. Her name was in lesson plans, printed on manuals, written in margins of PowerPoint slides. Every instructor used her as the model for balance under pressure. Every trainee whispered about her in the same tone they used for legends, half awe, half fear. But Maya Brooks didn't feel legendary. She felt tired. Tired of being remembered for one night when she just wanted to forget. The command had started using her for demonstrations, controlled scenarios filmed for training use. She played her part with precision, disarm, de-escalate, neutralize. But each time she saw her reflection in the recording monitor, she saw something missing. Her movements were still perfect. But the spark, the instinct that came from surviving, not teaching, had dulled. After one session, her colleague, Staff Sergeant Morales, approached her. "Brooks, you okay? You've been somewhere else lately." She wiped her hands on a towel, eyes distant. "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." She looked up at him, steady, tired, direct. "You ever wonder," she said, What happens when the fight's over but the world won't let you leave it? He didn't answer, because he didn't know how. That night, Maya sat alone in her quarters, staring at the framed certificate on her desk, Army Commendation Medal for distinguished conduct and tactical leadership. It meant something once. Now it just looked like paper under glass. Next to it was a small wooden box. Inside, the same photo of her and her brother, the one from before Ranger School. He'd been in uniform then too, smiling like the world was still simple. He didn't make it back from his second deployment. That was the real reason she'd joined. Not to fight, but to understand. And even now, after years of missions and training, she still didn't. She picked up his dog tags from the box, turning them in her hand. The metal was cold, the weight small but familiar. Like a promise she'd never quite kept. A week later, the Pentagon requested her presence again. Not for ceremony this time, for consultation. A security detail incident overseas had gone wrong. They wanted her insight, her doctrine, to revise how soldiers handled civilian aggression during peacekeeping operations. She sat through the meeting quietly. Advisors, generals, civilian analysts, all talking about escalation curves, acceptable thresholds of force, risk metrics. Not one of them had ever been in a bar fight. Not one had ever been close enough to smell adrenaline. When they finally asked her to speak, she took a breath. "With respect, sir," she said, voice low but steady, "you can't train humanity out of conflict. You can only control what you bring into it. The rest is chaos." The room went silent. The general nodded slowly. "Well said, Sergeant." She didn't feel complimented. She felt exposed. Like she'd said something too honest for the room to hold. Back at Fort Benning, Maya returned to her usual rhythm, teaching, training, breathing in the routine that kept her sane. Until one morning, a black SUV arrived at the range. Out stepped two civilians in suits. And a cameraman. The Army Public Affairs Office had decided to film a short documentary about the human face behind the Brooks Protocol. They wanted to capture the woman who redefined resilience. She tried to say no. They said it was already approved. The first take began with her walking down the range, slow motion, sunlight cutting through the dust. The interviewer's voice followed from behind the camera. "Sergeant Brooks, when people hear your name, they think strength. They think of that night at the Iron Horse, one woman standing against four men. What does it feel like to be that symbol?" Maya paused, looked off camera. Then said quietly, "Heavy." The interviewer blinked, "Heavy." "Because people remember the fight," she said, "but not the fear. They remember control, not the choice behind it. I didn't want to fight that night. I just didn't want to be hurt again." The interviewer hesitated, unsure if this was the quote they wanted. But the cameraman didn't stop filming. And for once, Maya didn't stop talking. "Everyone loves the story," she said, "but stories are tidy. They cut out the parts that don't fit. Nobody asks what happens after. When the adrenaline fades, when you go home and all that strength people admire just sits there with nowhere to go." The crew was silent. No one said cut. For the first time since the Iron Horse, she felt like she'd told the truth. When the documentary aired months later, it went viral. Not because of the fight. Because of her words. Clips spread across social media. Her face calm, voice soft, saying, "Strength isn't loud. It's what you do when no one's watching. It's walking away when you could destroy someone and choosing not to." For weeks, recruits quoted it in class. Veterans reposted it. Families sent her messages thanking her for showing their daughters a different kind of strong. And still Maya stayed silent. Because attention felt too much like being trapped again, surrounded, watched, misread. The Army turned her into the embodiment of discipline. But discipline is lonely. At night she walked the track alone, laps under the floodlights, rhythm steady. Sometimes she'd pause halfway through, close her eyes and listen. The sound of the wind, the smell of grass, the faint thud of boots far away. And she'd think, this is the only peace I'll ever get. One evening, Captain Palmer found her sitting on the bleachers again. "Figured I'd find you here," Palmer said, sitting beside her. "Bad habit," Maya replied. "No such thing, you're just allergic to celebration." Maya chuckled softly. "Celebration for people who win." "You didn't win?" Palmer asked. "I survived," Maya said. "That's not the same." Palmer was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You know, you gave a lot of people permission to be strong. You ever think about that?" Maya looked at her, eyes tired but warm. "No, I was too busy trying not to break." Palmer smiled faintly. "That's what strength looks like, Sergeant." Months passed. The legend of Maya Brooks grew louder, but inside, her world grew quieter. The Iron Horse had become something of a pilgrimage spot now, soldiers stopping by just to see the plaque, to touch the bar where she'd stood. When Maya returned one night, she found the bartender polishing glasses, same as always. He smiled when he saw her. "Long time." "Been busy," she said. "Doing hero stuff." "Paperwork," she said, "the real battlefield." He laughed, sliding her the usual. "You know they've got a poster of you up in the hallway now. Army PR sent it over." She groaned. "Please tell me you burned it." He chuckled. "I was gonna, but the new recruits keep taking pictures with it. Makes them behave. It's like having a ghost watching over the place." She shook her head, half amused, half tired. "I didn't sign up to be anyone's ghost." "No," he said quietly, "but sometimes the world decides what we become." She looked at him, eyes soft, the weight of years sitting behind them. "Then I hope they remember me right," she said. He smiled. "I think they will." When she left the Iron Horse that night, she paused by the plaque again. The brass had dulled from years of fingerprints. The inscription was familiar, but she read it anyway. "Rangers don't start fights, but we finish them." She brushed her thumb across the words and whispered, "We don't finish them, we survive them." And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a myth. She just felt human again. That night, she stood outside under the stars, the lights of Fort Benning glowing faintly in the distance. A convoy rumbled past on the highway, soldiers heading out for deployment, laughter faint through the open windows. She watched them disappear into the dark. And for the first time in years, she thought maybe, just maybe, her story had done something right. Not because it made her famous, but because it made the next generation a little less afraid. She closed her eyes and let the Georgia wind move through her hair, her voice a whisper against the quiet night. "If the price of peace is being remembered, I'll pay it." Then she turned and walked toward the barracks. Back to the job. Back to where legends go when the story ends, not into history books, but back into duty. Because for soldiers like Maya Brooks, the mission never ends. It just gets quieter. It had been 2 years since the Iron Horse. 2 years since the night that made her name echo through every training hall in the Army. And 2 years since Maya Brooks stopped seeing herself as just a ranger. She'd become something quieter, a living example, a cautionary tale, a symbol for calm under fire. But symbols have one fatal flaw. They don't bleed. People do. It started on a quiet Thursday morning. Maya was finishing a training cycle when the call came in. Request for immediate deployment support, civilian unrest, domestic zone, joint ops. She didn't ask questions. You don't when your orders come with a clearance code stamped urgent. Within 6 hours, she was wheels down in Chicago, the city skyline cut by smoke columns and flashing lights. National Guard units had been mobilized after protests near a government facility had spiraled out of control. Looting, arson, armed civilians in the streets. It wasn't war, but it wasn't peace either. And that made it dangerous. Her temporary assignment was simple: assist local law enforcement with coordination and de-escalation. Her presence, command said, was symbolic. That word again. The brass believed her reputation might help calm tensions, that the ranger who teaches restraint could humanize the response. But the ground didn't feel symbolic. It felt unstable. The kind of place where one wrong move could rewrite headlines in blood. Maya stepped out of the Humvee and surveyed the street. Rows of abandoned cars, storefronts shattered. Graffiti still wet on the walls, no trust, no peace. The air stung of tear gas residue and burned rubber. Soldiers in riot gear stood shoulder to shoulder, shields up, visors down. Opposite them, a crowd angry, scared, desperate. This wasn't the battlefield she trained for. This was something worse. Because everyone here spoke the same language. And fear didn't need translation. "Brooks," a voice shouted. Captain Sarah Palmer jogged up, helmet under one arm. They hadn't seen each other in months. "You've got to stop showing up in my nightmares," Maya said dryly. Palmer smirked. "You wish. Command wants you to advise on engagement protocol." Maya scanned the street. "How bad?" "Bad," Palmer said. "Civilians have rifles, homemade barricades, a few snipers on rooftops. Nobody's firing yet, but it's close." Maya's gaze moved to the line, soldiers gripping their shields, fingers twitching on triggers. The tension was electric. One spark and the city would burn again. She moved forward, unarmed, no riot gear, just her fatigues and the calm that had once disarmed 4 men in a bar. Palmer followed close behind. "You sure you don't want a vest?" "I've already got one," Maya said, tapping her chest. "Discipline." She walked to the barricade, where a handful of civilians, men and women both, shouted across the line. Their anger wasn't just noise. It had rhythm, reason. Pain disguised as defiance. A man near the front, early 30s, shaking, hands white around a hunting rifle, met her eyes. "Stay back," he warned. "Don't come closer." Maya stopped 5 feet away. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said quietly. "Yeah," he spat. "That uniform says otherwise." "Maybe," she said, "but that gun says you're scared." He blinked, thrown off by the simplicity of it. "I've been scared too," she continued. "It makes you feel cornered, makes bad ideas look like good ones." "You don't know anything about me," he said, but his voice cracked. "You're right," she said, "but I know what happens when fear decides who pulls the trigger." She could feel the soldiers behind her, the weight of their training, waiting for permission. And the crowd in front of her, a wave of rage looking for somewhere to crash. For one suspended second, the world held its breath. Then someone threw a bottle. It shattered against a shield, exploding in a spray of glass and fire. Gasoline Molotov. The line erupted. Shields slammed forward. Civilians screamed. The sound of chaos folded into itself. Palmer shouted orders, trying to hold the perimeter. Maya dove sideways, pulling a fallen guardsman out of the flames. "Hold the line," Palmer yelled. "Non-lethal only." But the crowd was moving now, a surge of desperate energy. A gun went off sharp, too close. A single shot. And that was enough. Maya scanned the source, saw the same man with the rifle, eyes wide, terrified at what he'd just done. The bullet hadn't hit anyone, yet. But the soldiers were raising their weapons now, safety catches clicking like thunder. "Don't shoot," Maya yelled, running forward. She didn't think, she just moved. 12 years of training compressed into muscle memory. She reached the man just as another soldier fired a warning round. The crack tore through the air. The man flinched, a finger tightening on his trigger by reflex. Maya slammed into him, grabbing the barrel, twisting it away. The gun discharged, a wild shot into the pavement. Sparks flew. Screams rose. She forced him down, pinning his arm, shouting over the chaos. "Stop, you're done, it's over." The crowd froze, a still frame in motion. For a long heartbeat, the world was silent except for the sound of Maya's breathing. Then slowly, the man let go of the weapon. His body went slack. His eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean to," he whispered. "I didn't." "I know," Maya said softly, "but intent doesn't stop bullets." The soldiers secured the perimeter. Paramedics moved in. The riot dispersed as quickly as it began, fear turning to relief, adrenaline to exhaustion. Maya sat on the curb, helmet in her lap, watching smoke drift through the streetlights. Palmer approached, crouched beside her. "You all right?" she asked. Maya nodded. "Yeah." "You just stopped a bloodbath." Maya didn't look at her. "No," she said quietly, "I just delayed one." Palmer frowned. "Don't do that, you saved lives today." "I know," Maya said, "but it shouldn't take me showing up for people to remember restraint." Palmer looked at her. "You wrote the standard, Maya. You can't blame yourself for people not living up to it." Maya gave a dry smile. "Maybe not, but the standard has my name on it, feels like I should live up to it too." That night after debrief, Maya found herself walking through the empty Chicago streets. The rain had started, a soft drizzle that turned broken glass into glitter. She stopped outside a boarded cafe window and saw her reflection in the glass, tired eyes, rain on her face like sweat. Behind her reflection, a poster was taped to the wall. A black and white image of her from that old documentary. Beneath it, someone had written in marker, "Discipline is strength." She stared at it for a long time, then reached up, pulled the poster down and folded it in half. The next morning, news outlets were already calling it the Brooks intervention. Footage of her restraining the armed protester looped across screens, the calm ranger who disarmed chaos again. Commentators called it de-escalation through authority. Others called it the Army's humanity. None of them mentioned the trembling in her hands afterward. Palmer found her sitting alone at the airfield hangar, waiting for transport back to base. "They're calling you a hero again," Palmer said softly. "Then they weren't paying attention," Maya replied. Palmer smiled faintly. "You sound like the first time I met you." Maya chuckled, shaking her head. "I keep hoping the world learns the lesson so I don't have to keep teaching it." "Maybe it has," Palmer said, "at least a little." Maya looked out across the tarmac, soldiers loading gear, engines warming. "You know what the funny thing is," she said. "Every time I try to walk away from violence, it keeps finding me." Palmer nodded. "Because it knows you can handle it." "Maybe," Maya said quietly, "but someday I'd like to not have to." On the flight back to Georgia, she sat by the window, watching clouds drift below. The world looked peaceful from up there, small, quiet, almost innocent. She thought about the man in Chicago, about the terror in his eyes when he realized what he'd almost done. She thought about the soldiers behind her, waiting for orders that would have haunted them forever. And she thought about herself, the ranger who'd built an entire doctrine around calm, but couldn't remember the last time she'd felt any. Her reflection flickered faintly in the window. She whispered to it, almost like prayer. "Don't become what you fight." When the plane landed, she stayed seated for a while, letting everyone else leave first. Her hands rested on her knees, steady again now. The kind of calm that comes after chaos, the silence that soldiers carry like a second uniform. She wasn't sure what would come next, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The legend of Maya Brooks might belong to the Army. But the lesson, the real one, still belonged to her. That night back at Fort Benning, she stood outside her barracks, the warm southern wind brushing past her uniform. She could hear faint laughter from the mess hall, young soldiers unwinding after drills. She smiled faintly. For the first time, it didn't bother her to be left out of the noise. Because legends don't belong in crowds. They belong in the quiet, where memory sharpens and purpose becomes clear. She looked out at the training field, at the students still awake, running night exercises. And she whispered softly into the wind, words meant for them, for herself, for whoever needed to hear it. It's not the fight that defines you. It's what you choose to do after. They say time heals everything. But for soldiers, time doesn't heal. It only teaches you to carry things more quietly. And Maya Brooks had learned to carry a lot. The year after the Chicago incident, she stopped counting the days since the Iron Horse. The fight that once defined her had turned into something else entirely. A story people told to inspire, to teach, to warn. But for her, it was still just a memory. Not of victory, but of choice. She'd never forgotten that moment. 4 men, 1 voice, 1 heartbeat that refused to break. That was the night she learned the difference between strength and control. And even now, years later, she still lived by that truth. Her transfer orders came on a Tuesday morning. Routine, unceremonious. Brooks, you're being reassigned to Ranger Training Battalion Headquarters, Senior Combatives Advisor. It was the kind of post given to legends who didn't realize they'd become one. Her new office was small, window cracked, paint peeling from the edges of the wall. But from that desk, she could see the training field, recruits running under the morning sun, voices echoing the same cadence she once shouted years ago. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was being replaced. She felt continued. By now, Jessica Palmer, the bartender's daughter, was a ranger instructor herself. When Maya saw her again, it was like looking into a mirror tilted just slightly toward the future. "Permission to speak freely, Sergeant Major?" Jessica asked. Maya smiled. "You never needed permission for that." Jessica grinned. "They're calling the next batch of recruits Brooks Class 5. Maya groaned softly. "You're kidding." "Nope, you're officially a curriculum now." She sighed. "God help them." Jessica laughed. "You know, some of these girls, they joined because of you. They read about what you did, watched that old documentary. You gave them something to believe in." Maya's voice softened. "I didn't give them anything, I just showed up. The belief was already there." Jessica tilted her head. "That's the thing about belief, Sergeant. It needs someone to go first." Maya looked out toward the training field, recruits crawling through the mud, shouting, struggling. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Then I hope they go farther than I ever did." Weeks passed. The Army ran like it always had: drills, reports, briefings, paperwork. But the faces were different now. Younger, more diverse. And for the first time, women weren't the exception. They were just rangers. Maya spent most of her time in the field, training hand to hand, running combat simulations, observing evaluations. But sometimes she'd stop mid-drill, just watching from a distance. Every now and then, a young ranger would glance back, recognize her, and straighten their stance. It wasn't fear, it wasn't even reverence. It was respect. And it felt like enough. Late one night, Maya sat outside her quarters under a sky thick with stars. She held her brother's dog tags in her hand, the metal catching moonlight. For years, she'd wondered what he would think of her, what he'd say if he saw what she'd become. Would he recognize the sister he'd taught to shoot tin cans off a fence post? Would he even understand the woman the world turned into a myth? She smiled faintly. He probably would have teased her first. "You went and scared the whole damn army, didn't you?" he'd say. She closed her eyes, whispered into the quiet. I didn't scare them, I reminded them. The next morning, Maya was asked to speak at a graduation, the largest ranger class to date. 500 soldiers stood at attention on the parade field, uniforms crisp, boots shining. She wasn't big on speeches, but she knew some moments demand voice, even from those who prefer silence. When she stepped onto the stage, the applause hit like thunder. She waited for it to fade, slow, deliberate, until all that was left was the rustle of flags in the wind. Then she spoke. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. You've earned something today that no one can ever take from you. The right to call yourself a ranger. She let the words hang. But I want you to remember something. The patch on your arm doesn't make you strong. The uniform doesn't make you brave. It's the choices you make when no one's watching. That's what defines you. Her gaze moved across the crowd, hundreds of faces, all young, all listening. You'll be tested, maybe not by an enemy, maybe by fear or anger or injustice. And when that happens, when the moment comes, remember this. Strength isn't about hitting back. It's about standing your ground when you don't have to fight at all. A pause. Wind through the flagpoles. The silence was the kind that meant something had landed. Then she ended with the line that had followed her through the years, the one that still felt true. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. When she stepped down, Jessica was waiting at the edge of the stage. Still giving them chills, she said, smiling. Maya shrugged. Words don't mean much unless you've lived them. Jessica looked at her, really looked. Yeah, she said softly, and you did. That evening, the sun dropped behind the tree line, bleeding orange light over the training field. Maya walked alone along the path to the range, quiet, steady footsteps on gravel. At the far end, a group of recruits was cleaning rifles, laughing quietly. One of them saw her and nudged the others. They stood up straight, saluting instinctively. She waved them down. At ease, you're off duty. Sergeant Major Brooks, one of them said, hesitating, can we ask something? Go ahead. Is it true you took down 4 guys by yourself, back before they called it the Brooks Protocol? Maya smiled faintly. That story's grown legs, she said, but yes, it happened. What did it feel like? The recruit asked. She thought for a long time. The field was silent except for crickets and the distant thud of a drill still running. Like a choice, she said finally, not to be small, not to stay silent. The recruits nodded, unsure what to say. As she turned to go, one of them spoke again. Ma'am, do you ever regret it? She paused. The night breeze caught her hair, carried the scent of dust and gun oil. Every day, she said, and not once. Then she smiled, the kind that carried both pain and peace, and walked away. Years later, after she retired, a new generation of Rangers still trained under the Brooks Protocol. Most of them never met her. Some thought she was a myth, a story told to make them believe in calm under fire. But on the wall of every training bay under the American flag hung a simple quote etched in metal, burnished by time. Discipline beats chaos every time. Staff Sergeant Maya Brooks, 75th Ranger Regiment. And below it, a smaller inscription, added quietly by her students after she was gone. Rangers don't start fights. They finish them with honor. In the years that followed, civilians would still ask about her. About the woman who stopped a riot with words. Who ended a fight without killing. Who turned restraint into a form of courage. The truth was, there wasn't much to tell. No statues, no parades. Just a name whispered in respect, and a legacy that taught others how to stand firm without raising a fist. Because in the end, that was her real victory. Not the night at the Iron Horse. Not the medals or the doctrine or the fame. It was the quiet understanding that strength doesn't demand recognition, it demands responsibility. Somewhere, years later, an instructor walked across a training field at dawn. A young female recruit fell behind on a run, breath ragged, tears on her cheeks. The instructor slowed, jogged beside her. "You got this," she said. "Brooks' class doesn't quit." The recruit looked up. "Who's Brooks?" The instructor smiled. "She's the reason you're here." And somewhere beyond that sunrise, in memory, or spirit or history, Maya Brooks kept walking too. Not toward glory or noise or war. Just forward, into the quiet, where peace feels like purpose and purpose feels like home. Because sometimes the strongest thing a soldier can do is stop fighting. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Fade to black.